Going to a restaurant can be a real dice roll, and in this video, we've brought together stories of the worst restaurant experiences imaginable. There's rude waiters, deranged dishes, and melodrama with other customers, and in the case of the last story, one Christmas ruined beyond all repair. I went to a restaurant with my wife, and we both placed our order of chicken parmesan with the waitress. My wife's food came out in 20 minutes or so. She finished hers, and I was still waiting. I asked the same waitress if my food was on its way. Her answer left me stunned. She told me I didn't order any food. I asked her, why would I come to a restaurant and not order food? She was insistent that I didn't order anything. There was a lot of back and forth. The manager finally came out. His reaction was even more infuriating. He took her side. I asked again, why would I come to a restaurant and not order anything? After they were persistent, I knew what I had to do. I said, I'll be back in 5 minutes. I walked next door to McDonald's, ordered a Happy Meal, came back, sat at the table, and ate it in front of them. Now, I usually don't condone clapping back at service staff. I think it's fine when they double down on a mistake. Now, that is how you get revenge. I wish I could see the look on their faces. A friend of mine and I used to go to a local Greek diner called the Amphoras. In their heyday, they were able to open up a second location. But the first location was special. It was kind of a dark, cavernous place with a bakery next door. It used to be one of the few places open 24/7 in my neighborhood. The waitstaff was always a mix. I don't know what their hiring process was, but they were either incredibly good waiters or really, really bad. They all wore uniforms, a really bizarre kind of upscale suit that was even stranger. The decor was always super weird too. It had a lot of financial issues and underwent a lot of remodels. This story takes place during one of those remodels. It was the middle of a weekday and post-lunch rush. My friend invited me to have lunch, but I already had lunch, so I just ordered a sundae. There were the constant sounds of remodeling coming from the kitchen area. As I scooped into my sundae, I felt something very hard in my mouth. I spewed it out and saw the silver curl of a metal shaving. I looked in the sundae and saw a few more. I called the waiter over and said, hey, there are metal shavings in my sundae. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, sir, how awful, or even trying to have a sympathetic tone, the waiter looked at me like, okay. I asked, well, may I have a sundae without metal shavings in it? That's when he lost it. He replied, you want a free sundae, huh? That what you want? Wise guy. You think you can come here and... Then he switched to a language I didn't understand, perhaps Greek. The manager heard this guy screaming at me and came over to see what was going on. He asked what the problem was, then things escalated. The waiter started shouting at him. The manager shouted back. Soon, the two of them were screaming at each other very heatedly, but I still couldn't understand what they were saying. Finally, the waiter tossed his serving tray down on the floor and stomped off into the kitchen. Then we heard screaming and shouting in Spanish, followed by horrific crashing noises. It was like someone was fighting or tossing around pans. The sound of construction stopped. We heard people shouting in alarm in English, Spanish, and possibly Greek. The manager sincerely apologized and said he would be right back. He went into the kitchen where there was more shouting and crashing. The rest of the waitstaff rushed to the kitchen and looked into those little round windows, trying to see what was going on. Eventually, the crashing and shouting stopped. Then the manager came back out. He said, hello, listen, I am very sorry about his behavior. I'm going to comp both of your meals, but it came with a condition. He added, however, I would like you to leave immediately because I'm about to fire that man and fear for your safety afterward. We accepted his offer and got out of there super quickly. But the story doesn't end there. As we were putting on our coats and leaving, I heard someone say in English, "Did he just lock himself in the freezer?" This guy is so lucky for 3 reasons. 1, that he didn't break a tooth or cut himself on those metal shavings. 2, that he got to witness the biggest meltdown in food service history. And 3, that he got out of there unscathed after the waiter freaked out. I was at a place called Spaghetti Warehouse in the Flats in Cleveland in the early 90s. A few co-workers and I were visiting the area for some work at a steel mill for a week or so, and it was one of the only times we were out as a small 4-person team. We were seated in some train car thing. The waitress and a co-worker of mine were flirting back and forth. They served bread from a wicker basket. The waitress took a knife to serve one while holding the basket, and that's when disaster struck. She sliced through the basket to part of her hand where her fingers met. We actually had no idea what happened. She just hurried away without saying anything. Then we noticed the trail of blood in the train car. We assumed she told the restaurant team what had happened. We sat there figuring she'd come back eventually when a manager walked by. She asked if everything was all right. We hadn't seen or heard from our waitress in about 25 minutes by that point, and the manager didn't believe it until we pointed out the blood trail. She was aghast. The funniest part? It ended up being one of 3 times I've had my waitress walk out or quit while I was sitting there, leaving the restaurant unaware. Accidents happen, and it's easy to panic when they do, but there's something pretty funny about just walking out and not telling a single soul that you're going. And on the other side of things, it's absolutely bananas that the OP has had this happen multiple times. Is this something that happens regularly that I just don't know about? We went into a newly opened Mexican place after booking the table the week before for a party of 5. We entered, and the place was absolutely jammed. The first problem? We got a table that was clearly too small for 5 beefy dudes to sit around. After a few minutes, a waiter came over and took our drink order. Since it was so busy, we asked for 6 bottles of Corona and 4 bottles of Heineken so we wouldn't have to wait for extra drinks. About 10 minutes later, just as we were about to ask for an update on the drinks, they turned up. They were all room temperature, and there was no lime in the Coronas. Whatever, we just wanted a quick bite before heading into the city to drink. The waiter then took our food order. We asked for normal, basic Mexican menu items, no custom orders. Nearly 40 minutes later, we had finished our drinks and had gotten another round. That's when we noticed something weird. While all the tables were full, very little food seemed to be coming out of the kitchen. We were about to pay for the drinks and leave when the food arrived. It looked undercooked. The portions were tiny for the price, and the plates simply didn't fit on the table. We had to place our drink bottles on the floor to make space along with the little cutlery holder. As soon as my friend took a bite of his burrito, he dropped it on his plate. It was frozen in the middle. I opened mine up, and while it wasn't frozen, it was barely lukewarm in the middle. We called for the waiter and asked for them to be replaced immediately, as we had been there for 90 minutes at that point. The waiter just shrugged and took the plates away. 10 more minutes passed. The table next to us just left without paying for their drinks, as they had been waiting nearly an hour for their meal. Then the food came back. They had just microwaved the same burritos. My friend got his back with the bite mark out of it. We got up, paid for the drinks, and told the cashier that we were not paying for the food. Their answer was brutal. They shrugged and said, "We're disappointed you didn't enjoy the service, but you ate 3 of the 5 meals. You still need to pay for those." We refused. The place lasted about 4 months before closing. Now, I love a frozen burrito as much as the next guy. Maybe more. But if I waited 90 minutes for food and I got one that hadn't even finished cooking, I'd be mad too. My hubby and I were eating out. I asked if a certain dish had mushrooms because I was allergic. The waitress said it did not, so I ordered it. It came out covered in mushrooms. I asked the waitress if it was maybe the wrong order or if she had thought I wanted it with mushrooms. I don't know how she would have gotten that impression, but I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. I asked for the dish to be remade because of my allergy. Before walking away, she said something so rude. She said under her breath, "You could just, pick them off." So I got up, went to the register, and asked for the manager. I explained the situation, being sure to mention the allergy and being far more apologetic than I should have been, given the situation. His reaction just made things worse. He suggested that I switch entrees with my husband. Well, my husband had ordered the stuffed mushrooms, so I explained that wasn't an option and that I really would just like the dish remade. I said, "Don't get me wrong, it looks delicious. I wish I could eat it. I just don't think you want your front entrance blocked by the ambulance that has come to take me to the ER if I do eat it." I said it sort of jokingly because I didn't want to tick off anyone who saw my food before it got to me. The manager huffed and briskly walked to our table. I couldn't believe what he did next. He not only took my plate, he also took away my full glass of wine for some reason and disappeared into the kitchen. I told my husband to eat, so he did and had another glass of wine. I ordered another as well. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. The waitress only brought his drink and the check. We were charged for 6 drinks, his meal, and 2 times for my meal. My husband contemplated arguing with the manager, but in the end, he just did the math for what we'd actually consumed and left exact change. Whoa. It's obviously pretty rude to doubt a customer's allergy, but charging them for a bunch of stuff they never drank or ate is truly next level. That waitress has some serious audacity. My dad and I went to this place in New York City that put on a little theatrical show while you dined. I was 14 at the time, and my dad and I walked into this place, and it already looked sketchy. Off the bat, it looked extremely understaffed, and all the staff that were there looked like they hated their job. There were straw wrappers on the floor, and no one sat us for 15 minutes. So we just sat ourselves. We had been to this place before when I was little, so we decided to give it the benefit of the doubt, expecting the food and the show to be the same fun experience it used to be. One of the actors for the show was walking around to greet the guests, and my dad, being the guy he is, was trying to playfully joke around with him. However, he seemed really caught off guard by it and didn't play along, which was weird. But that was only the beginning. The service took forever, and after we finally got our order in, my dad had to use the bathroom. As he was gone, the actor approached me, sat in my dad's seat, and asked me a chilling question. He said, "Does your dad embarrass you?" I was like, no. He proceeded to say, "If I had a dad like that, I'd hide my head in shame." Normally, that would be funny to me, but this guy seemed like he was serious about it. I then noticed something even more disturbing. The only guests this actor was talking to were children. He was fully hopping booths and scooting next to the kids. He wasn't looking at or speaking to the adults at all. I've never been so uncomfortable in my life. We got our food after an hour, and it was mid at best. I ordered a pasta dish, and it was low-key tasteless. My dad got a patty melt, but it tasted like it had been left out on the counter for way too long. But it gets even weirder. The show itself lasted a grand total of about 3 minutes, and it was just the creepy actor guy talking to a mummy that descended from the ceiling. I realize this story sounds like an actual fever dream, and as much as I wish it was, it wasn't. It actually happened. I appreciate the OP clarifying that this is a real story because honestly, it's so weird that even if it happened to me, I might have trouble believing it. I guess the real dinner and a show was the bizarre behavior. We used to frequent this Italian joint owned by a cranky old man who gave everyone guff, but in an endearing way. The food was delicious. He retired and his daughter took over. The first time we dined there after she took over was horrible. My husband wasn't really hungry, so we ordered soup and salad. We asked for no tomatoes and got a salad that was absolutely doused in tomatoes. He didn't complain, just picked around them. Then he tried the soup and literally almost spewed it out. It was so salty. We are not salt sensitive. There was something wrong with the soup. Like the lid of the salt shaker fell off while seasoning kind of wrong. She inquired specifically about the soup, and he politely told her that it was too salty. Her reaction was deranged. She used his own spoon to taste it without asking. She fully agreed that it was too salty and took it away, but didn't offer to replace it with anything else. She just took it. Somewhere along the line, despite agreeing that the soup was off, she decided we were jerks. At the next check-in, she looked at his salad and snidely said, "What, you don't like tomatoes?" This to the customer, who asked for no tomatoes and didn't complain when they got all the tomatoes. She went to the bar and obviously talked trash about us to the regulars. She was pointing, laughing, and we could clearly hear the words salt and tomatoes. As we were walking out, she rudely shouted, "You might want to try a different soup next time if you're so sensitive to salt." This was followed by cackling from her and the bar patrons. But she got what was coming to her eventually. The place closed down a month later. Publicly shaming paying customers is a new approach to customer service that I've never seen before, but hey, it looks like karma came and sorted it all out in the end anyway. There was a woman who decided the table in the middle of the restaurant was the best and most hygienic place to change her baby's diaper, as opposed to the purposely built baby changing station. When she was challenged by another customer about this, her reaction was so horrifying, I'll never forget it. She bare hand grabbed a pile of baby poo out of the diaper, smacked the customer across the face with it, then smeared poop on the table and her chair, all while screaming and swearing her head off. Eventually, another customer walked up to her, punched her, and then walked out. It turns out that that was just the start of the drama. We had the authorities, an ambulance, and CPS all pile in. The worst part? Management tried to make another employee who was not trained for this situation to clean up. He just straight up quit right then and there when we were already short-staffed. My jaw is on the floor. This is probably the most horrifying scene I can think of short of something from a horror movie. Actually, I'm sure if you asked anyone who has worked in the service industry before, they'd say this is worse than a horror movie. We were at a soul food restaurant in my neighborhood. I showed up before the lunch rush with my then toddler who needed a high chair. We were the only people there. The older couple who ran the place ignored me for 10 minutes while hissing at each other about something. The guy took my order, did a double take at the baby, and asked if I needed a high chair. I said yes. The dude turned to their open kitchen window and had a loud screaming match with his wife, the chef, for 10 minutes. They went into their attic storage and slammed a high chair down in front of me. The chef then screamed, "I cook. I'm not your servant," at the husband. At that point, I asked for a soda and was looking at 25 minutes before they even took my order. Finally, I politely asked if I could place an order for fried chicken. That's when it took an even darker turn. A pan was thrown across the kitchen and bounced off the wall, and they argued about whose turn it was to marinate the chicken last night. I just put my kid back in the stroller and walked out, while they had a full brawl in the kitchen. They closed within a month but still paid rent on the place for 2 years without ever being open. This is a seriously funny one. If something like this ever happened to me, I'd be looking everywhere for cameras, convinced that I was on a prank show. Years ago, I went out to a local Indian restaurant in the neighborhood. There were about 4 other tables of what looked like couples. We'd been seated at a table for about 5 minutes when a random middle-aged woman walked in and did the unthinkable. She plonked herself down at our table, grabbed a glass, and started drinking our wine. Then she started rambling on about a bunch of stuff. The restaurant was about 3/4 empty apart from the other 4 tables. Most of them clocked what was going on, and all their conversations subsided to a murmur. We told her we wouldn't be sharing our food or any more drinks with her. I managed to motion the one waitress over and told her, "We don't know her. Can you get rid of her?" Her reaction was shocking. The waitress hightailed it back into the kitchen without a peep. The rest of the room was completely silent now. They were no doubt counting their lucky stars that she didn't sit down with them. Things began to get pretty heated, and she was telling us how she still had contacts in a cult and how she'll find us and get us. She was finally convinced to leave when my housemate said she could either leave by the door or he could throw her through the front window. Well, that's one I've never heard before. I've definitely had some meals with people I didn't necessarily want to eat with, but never a complete stranger who refused to leave. The waitress's reaction, or lack thereof, is really the cherry on top of this bizarre story. We went to a place where the service was ridiculously slow and incredibly disorganized, despite the restaurant being mostly empty. We waited at least 20 minutes to get menus, and they kept sending out other servers to confirm our orders. It took well over an hour before we even got our food. If all that wasn't bad enough, the server was the most aggravating human I've ever dealt with at a restaurant. One of my friends I was with had celiac disease. This story took place around when the gluten-free fad was at its peak, so it was understandable to a degree that a server would be a little annoyed when someone said they couldn't have gluten. This man wasn't a little annoyed. He seemed to take it as a personal insult. He just rolled his eyes and acted condescending whenever he spoke to my friend. The breaking point was when my friend asked if a certain meal had a gluten-free option when we were ordering. He gave some dismissive reply and said he'd go check after he placed our orders. The server came back an hour later with our food and saved my friend's meal for last. When he got to them, he said, "There isn't a gluten-free option for this meal, so you'll just have to eat it as it is," and then placed the dish in front of them and walked away. I'm sure it's frustrating to deal with bogus gluten allergies all the time, but to not even try to steer the person to another dish and then bring them a food they couldn't eat is so rude. I can't even imagine what they were thinking. I'd be so mad if I saw this play out. We went to a nice restaurant for our family Christmas dinner. I'd never been to the place, but I'd heard good things. Little did I know they were going to ruin my Christmas. Our food came out, but nothing for me. 10 minutes passed, 30 minutes. Everyone was done, but I still had no food. Finally, our waiter came over to me. It was the first time I'd seen him since the food came out. In a condescending voice, he told me what he'd done with my food, and I wanted to slap him. He told me they had given my sandwich to people in the drive-thru 3 times, and that it would be another 15 minutes for my food, and asked if that was okay. It definitely wasn't. I can understand a mistake like this happening once. Sure, twice. That's pretty weird. 3 times? Totally unacceptable. I'd be hangry too. That's the last story we've got for you today. But check out the rest of our channel for more videos full of absolutely wild real-life stories. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.